Well, welcome to another edition of Touchstones Music, episode 13. I'm continuing my series on music and albums from the 1960s. These are albums which I purchased when they were first released in the 1960s and which have been musical touchstones for me ever since. The goal is to introduce these albums to people who haven't heard them before and to reintroduce them to those who have but perhaps haven't listened to them for a while. So this episode, direct from Andy Warhol's famed New York studio, The Factory, to the record turntables of 1967, The Velvet Underground and Nico. Let's hear a cut from that, a little clip from it. I believe this is Waiting for the Man.
I'm waiting for my man.
That'll give you some idea what we're in store for here. So, about the band. Well, we heard Lou Reed, lead guitar and vocals, Sterling Morrison, rhythm guitar, John Cale on bass and etc., and also Nico on vocals, bottom left, Maureen Tucker on drums, bottom right. So, how this all came about was New Yorker Lou Reed and Welshman John Cale met in 1964. Cale was in America to study classical music on a scholarship. Reed was a singer-songwriter and guitarist who had worked for Pickwick Records as a songwriter. They bonded over similar musical tastes, including experimental music and the use of drones, similar to those used in Eastern music. So, an earlier version of what would eventually become the Velvets included Reed on guitar and vocals, Cale on bass, viola, and keyboards, Reed's college classmate Sterling Morrison on guitar. They later added Maureen Tucker, replacing an earlier drummer who they had considered too unreliable. Tucker was an unorthodox drummer herself who often played standing up using a minimalist drum kit which seldom included cymbals, which she disliked. Her simple, unusual rhythms suited the band's music, however. In fact, Reed was quoted as saying he'd like to keep everything simple musically because he wanted the lyrics to be first and foremost. He was, after all, first and foremost a lyricist. Now, Krista Pafkin, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, stage name Nico, pretty sure I'm getting that right, was a German-born singer-songwriter, model, and actress. Her film roles included Fellini's La Dolce Vita and Chelsea Girls by entrepreneurial avant-garde New York artist and filmmaker Andy Warhol. So, Nico began singing and later, at the suggestion of her friend, Doors vocalist Jim Morrison, writing songs. Rolling Stone Brian Jones, another friend, introduced her to Andy Warhol. She had quite the social circle she was moving in. So at this time, Warhol was managing the Velvet Underground and suggested adding Nico as a singer. He felt the band weren't good looking enough and wanted Nico for her model looks. The band reluctantly agreed, and she ended up singing 3 songs in the album, although Reed wrote the songs, but she ended up singing some of his songs. Whether he wrote them specifically with her in mind, I'm not sure. The recordings took place at Scepter and Mayfair Studios in New York City and TTG Studios in Los Angeles, California. The dates were April, May, and November of 1966. Now, Warhol was the overall producer, kind of the guiding light, but MGM brought in Tom Wilson to oversee the actual recordings. The album was released in March of 1967 on the Verve label. The length was almost 48 minutes, which is good for an album at that time. They were averaging around 40 minutes in those days. Critical reaction at the time was mixed, to say the least, but it is now considered a classic. So this is another self-titled album, obviously. Reed and Cale had formed several earlier groups with names like The Primitives, The Warlocks, this is my favorite, The Falling Spikes. It gets got imagery in your head for a while. The band eventually took the name The Velvet Underground from a paperback novel by Michael Lee about a secret sexual subculture. The band's drummer at the time suggested they use it as the name of the group, and the other members unanimously agreed, so they adopted the name in November of 1965. Now, a fair bit to unpack here. The album cover, the original cover was not what you see on the screen. The original cover was a picture, well, actually a print by artist Warhol, of a banana, which could be peeled to reveal underneath a flesh-colored banana. The front cover of my copy, which you see on the screen there, was the original rear copy, back copy of the Banana album. Now, it includes a photo taken at a Warhol performance event, the so-called exploding plastic inevitable events. And you can see that on your screen there at the top here. Now, there was a problem. The original back cover was the subject of a lawsuit by an actor named Eric Emerson, whose image in the performance event photo was used without his permission. Now, Emerson was having some legal problems and needed money. But MGM did not take this well. They decided not to pay. They recalled copies and had the actor's image airbrushed out, and in other cases, they put a black sticker over the image. Took it rather badly, I think. Now, I found this album in a department store record bin sometime in the fall of 1968. I'm pretty sure it was on sale. I had read an interesting article about New York artist Andy Warhol and his studio, The Factory. Although it wasn't the type of music I'd been listening to, I was curious about New York's music and art scene. I thought this record might give me some insight into those scenes. Plus, I was also looking to expand my musical horizons. Now, I suppose Heroin Chic might not have seemed an obvious choice. However, I found myself enjoying this album very much. Okay. This album is full of overt and covert references to drug use and fetishistic sexual practices, I guess you could say. Waiting for the Man, I'm pretty sure he's waiting for the man to get his fix. Venus and Fur, well, this will give you some idea. Now, a bit about the vocalizing in here. Reed and Nico shared the vocal chores. They both sing in this, as you can hear and will hear, in this sort of deadpan voice, which actually suits the lyrics quite well, and again emphasizes the lyrics, which was Reed's whole idea. Now, this clip we're going to hear is All Tomorrow's Parties, and this is one written by Reed, but sung by Nico, and we'll talk a bit more about her vocalizing after we hear a little bit of that song.
And what costume shall the poor girl wear?
Okay. Now, for those of you younger than me, and just about everybody on the planet is younger than me these days, there was an actress, a German actress and singer, named Marlene Dietrich. And Nico's vocalization reminds me very much of Dietrich's singing. Let's go to, side 2. More drug references. Gee, pretty overt there. Heroin and the Black Angels Death Song. It's starting to get scary. We're going to hear one more quick clip here, and this will be Heroin, and this is by Reed, sung by Reed.
I don't know just where I'm going.
Okay, Lou. This is the photo here is the back cover of my copy. Basically, just shows some information about the album, the songs, and so forth. Now, the Velvets are now seen as musical harbingers in the genres of punk, new wave, experimental, and avant-garde. If you don't believe me, just listen to something like from new wave, Blondie from the 80s. If you don't hear strong echoes of this album, I'd be very surprised. Reed went on to record numerous solo albums with varying degrees of success. He also endured, unfortunately, numerous bouts of depression, alcoholism, and drug addiction. After their initial dissolution in 1973, the Velvets would regroup sporadically, especially throughout the 90s, albeit without Nico, who continued performing as a singles act. By then, the Velvets' influence and significance was more widely recognized. In fact, by the 80s, only 10 years later, people were completely doing a complete 180 and saying, oh, hey, we missed the boat here. These people really were onto something extraordinary. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, because by then we'd got into punk and new wave and so forth. The Velvet Underground and Nico is ultimately a seminal album from a seminal rock band. This album has been one of my personal touchstones since I purchased it in the 60s, and I hope it will be also for other people. Well, that's it for this edition. As always, until next time, be well. Thanks for joining me.